Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and this week we're taking to the skies as we consider the future of air travel in the wake of coronavirus. Billions of dollars and thousands of jobs have been lost, so how will the industry recover? We'll be hearing from the Chief Executive of Finnair.
It's almost like putting SARS, the bird influenza, 9/11 and financial crisis together.
We'll also be finding out if government bailouts are the only way to make sure planes get off the tarmac. Plus, the new normal? Is this what taking a flight will look like for years to come? Any pilot will warn you about possible turbulence coming up, but no one could have predicted such a turbulent year for the aviation industry, which is worth an estimated $900 billion worldwide. To say the COVID-19 pandemic is a hard landing for airline companies would be a massive understatement. The problems began on the 23rd of January. All flights to the city of Wuhan were cancelled. Within a month, domestic air traffic in China had dropped by 84%, the worst figure since the International Air Transport Association's records began in 2000. And as the virus spread around the world to South Korea, to Iran, Italy, the rest of Europe, and the United States, it wasn't long before the planes stopped taking off. In March, global air travel dropped by 52% compared with last year, and in April it worsened. In the first week, 90% of flights in Europe were grounded. IATA is warning European airlines could lose up to $89 billion this year, with an estimated 55% fall in passenger demand compared to 2019. More than 6.5 million jobs are at risk. Now, US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is saying the economic impact of COVID-19 will be worse even than 9/11. IATA is predicting airlines will lose $113 billion as a result of the pandemic, and that's quadruple what estimates were just 3 months ago. The continued demand for social distancing on board makes air travel in conventional planes financially difficult, and airlines are resisting, and passengers might too. So what's the best route to recovery? Drive up prices to counter the loss? Drop prices to entice more passengers? Or should the focus be on in-flight pandemic protection? Whichever steps are taken, the risk of catching this virus mid-flight might be a price too high to pay for some time yet. Well, with more on the route to recovery, let's hear from Finnair. And Finnair is the winner of the World Airline Award for Best Northern Europe Airline for 9 consecutive years. The company's chief executive, Topi Marinen, joins me now from Helsinki. You described this pandemic as the biggest crisis in the history of aviation. Only the fittest will survive. Are you going to survive?
Yes, we will. And this is indeed the biggest peacetime crisis in the 100-year history of commercial aviation. It's almost like putting SARS, the bird influenza, 9/11 and financial crisis together. And if we look at, for example, Finnair, we, as so many other airlines in the world, have been forced to ground almost our entire fleet during the past weeks. Our April passenger numbers dropped with 99% from the April last year. But what we are currently seeing is that countries, especially in Europe, they are gradually lifting their lockdown measures and reopening their societies. And therefore, we start to see green shoots in terms of demand. And from beginning of July onwards, we are coming back to a more meaningful level of flying. We will be flying something like 30% of our normal level of flights during July.
Okay, so when you start flying again, what changes will you have had to make sure you stay flying and you're able to take off successfully?
We are doing a range of measures to take care of the health and safety of our passengers. We are, for example, doing social distancing at the airport. Perhaps the most visible element is that we ask our customers to use facial masks during the flights. We limit the movement on board the aircraft by, for example, boarding the aircraft from the rear. And we are also adjusting and amending our onboard service to minimize the personal contact between our cabin crew and the customers. So these are examples of the measures that we are doing in order to enable our customers to fly with confidence.
You say passengers will be wearing masks on board. What about air conditioning?
Well, the air conditioning, as you rightly point out, I mean, it's a very important health factor on board an aircraft. I mean, we are using the so-called HEPA filters, high efficiency particulate air filters that effectively change the air of an aircraft every 3 minutes. And this actually makes the quality of the air and the filtering of the air to resemble the quality that hospitals would be having in their operations theaters. And viruses, including coronavirus, are basically filtered by these high quality filters. And then that makes an aircraft a pretty similar environment in terms of virus transmission than, for example, on an office space would be, or a shopping mall, potentially.
Financially, you've obviously taken a big hit because, as you say, most of your fleet is grounded. Are you getting state support? And I know many other airlines around the world are being supported by state funding. And I wondered whether that gave your kind of airline, that kind of airline, an unfair advantage over the completely private operators.
We entered this crisis in a strong financial standing. We had strong cash reserves. Our cash to sales ratio was among the highest of European airlines. We had a healthy balance sheet. But for sure, we are taking a sizable financial hit, as basically all other airlines in the world are doing. We have one strength, and that strength is that we are a stock-listed company, but our majority is owned by the government of Finland. And with that strong financial backing, we are able to get out of the crisis in a solid form and also take advantage of the opportunities that this crisis might enable.
Earlier, you were talking about opportunities. Come a crisis comes an opportunity. Will this be an opportunity for you to put up your prices?
Well, it remains to be seen what happens in terms of prices on the market. And what we are seeing is that many airlines are adjusting capacity downwards. And I think that there will be true capacity adjustment on the market in a sense that there will be aircraft types that effectively will go out from the market. We are seeing some airlines letting go of Airbus 380s. Some are letting go of the old Boeing 747s and so forth. So true capacity adjustment is taking place. Many airlines are deferring their aircraft orders. So that's one part of the equation. But obviously, the other part of the equation is the demand. And the question is that how quickly the demand will come back. And in addition to customer confidence, the lift of travel restrictions obviously will play a big role in this. So I think that the jury is out in terms of the pricing levels when it comes to flying.
You are going to be positive about Finnair because you're the chief executive. But what about That's generally correct. Across the industry, across the aviation industry? Are there any reasons to be positive or cheerful looking forward?
Well, I think that the next couple of years in aviation are going to be challenging. Our estimate is that the passenger numbers will come back to 2019 levels in 2 to 3 years. And that is, pretty much in line with the estimate of IATA. But after that, I believe that aviation will come back to growth. And over the long term, aviation will be a growth industry. But the growth rate of aviation most likely will be more moderated than it used to be in the past during the high growth years.
Topi Manner, Chief Executive of Finnair, many thanks to you for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Still to come here on The Agenda, we'll talk to one of the most important figures in the aviation industry, head of the airline trade body IATA, about his plans for safety in the skies. On The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Welcome to CGTN.
And welcome back to The Agenda. The International Air Transport Association is the airline industry's trade association. It was founded in 1945 to set global standards for safety, security, efficiency, and sustainability. It's this body that is now trying to come up with a plan to return to something like normality post-pandemic. Well, to find out how they're planning to do that, I'm joined now by the Director General and CEO of IATA, Alexander Dejuniak. Alexander, first of all, can you describe what the impact of this pandemic is on the aviation industry?
For the aviation industry, this pandemic has had an unprecedented impact. We are losing more than half of our revenues for 2020, something above $310 billion. We will burn cash at a level which is very damaging for our industry. For the second quarter, it's over $60 billion. And the number of jobs that could be impacted by the COVID-19 crisis on the air transport sector, jobs that are directly and indirectly linked to our industry, is around 25 million worldwide. So, these numbers, I think, illustrate, the magnitude of this crisis, unprecedented magnitude of this crisis.
And who would you say is hurting the most? Which airlines?
Oh, I think everybody is suffering everywhere in the world. It started in Asia with the pandemic, and then moved to Europe, and now it is in the Americas. Everybody has suffered. No one has been protected. The historic and full-service airline, the new model airline, the low cost, because the main impact has come from the travel restriction and border closures that have been decided by governments. And so the whole fleet, or almost the whole fleet of passenger aircraft, has been grounded everywhere for all companies. No one has been protected.
But the pain is not being shared equally, isn't it? Because some governments are putting in a great deal of money to shore up their national airlines.
Yeah, it's true that we have strongly advocated in favor of a public support, using public money to support the airline industry, because we think that, first of all, we are absolutely key for the economic development, and secondly, that we are also critical to allow a strong and quick recovery when the crisis will be over. So we have asked government to put together rescue packages and strong financial supports. We have had a pretty open and supportive attitude from many governments all over the world, in Asia, in Middle East, in Europe,
But
in
is
America.
that fair? Is that fair on the private airlines?
We haven't advocated in favor of anyone particularly. We said we asked government to support the sector and then to define the appropriate package adapted to the situation of their country or their airline. So a kind of customized approach, but with a strong injection of cash, because we were dying of cash shortage.
Of course.
We were running. So we said, if governments, you want to have a strong airline sector that will survive this crisis, you have to inject cash by any means.
You've got to persuade passengers, first of all, to get onto planes again. Mm-hmm. And secondly, are you going to tell airlines that they have to practice social distancing on a plane?
What we are doing is we are working within the ICAO framework and under the ICAO umbrella in this task force that they have set up, with groups, not only the industry, so also us, but also the airport and the air traffic controllers, but also WHO, plus the governments, which are members of the ICAO Council. And they are working on a sanitary check and health control process that we minimize the risk of contamination on board, and that we minimize the risk of dissemination of the virus from one country to another.
The $64,000 question is, how soon do you expect to get back to some kind of pre-virus normality?
That's effectively a difficult question. What we said is two things. First of all, we have a phased approach to restart the airline, the air transport. First, starting with domestic market by the end of second quarter, continental market in the third quarter, and intercontinental in the fourth quarter, basically. But at the end of 2020, the level of the traffic should be between 50 to 60% of the 2019 reference. So it's still weak. And we have said that we should catch up with historical trends by the beginning of 2023. So it will take time.
You've already said this crisis is unprecedented.
Yes.
Therefore, is it an unprecedented opportunity to change the aviation industry, or the faults and the problems, for the better?
One point which has to be thought of is that the crisis we are facing is not a result of a particular weakness or default of the business model. It is completely an external crisis coming from outside, from the virus, from the consequence of the pandemic, and the decisions made by governments to restrict travel and close borders. So I'm not sure that in the future the business models of the airline industry will be significantly different. Perhaps we will see slightly less actors because, unfortunately, there will be bankruptcies.
When you say less actors, you mean fewer airlines?
The question is, does the world need so many airlines? Because it's a sector in which, consolidation has not happened. But it's also good news for customers, because it means that you have a diverse and very very important offer. with a strong competition. So
you're saying that because there are so many airlines, travel is cheaper than it should be in some ways because the margins are thinner.
But it contributes to cheap travel. That's for sure.
So is the age of cheap air travel over now?
I don't think so. Because you have such a weak demand at this stage, and this weakness will probably continue for at least some months, that the pressure on prices will remain important, and the pressure to maintain the prices low. So I'm not sure that the age of cheap travel is over. On the contrary, I think that we will continue to be able to travel with reasonable fares.
Alexander de Juniac, CEO of IATA, many thanks to you for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you very much.
So that's what the industry is planning, but does it go far enough to persuade passengers back onto planes? Well, I'm joined now by air transport consultant John Strickland. John, you've been a transport consultant for a long time, more than 30 years. What's your advice? How is the industry going to get back on its feet?
There's just so many challenges for this particular COVID-19 virus pandemic, far more than I've seen for any other challenge previously in my time in the industry, because it's so all-embracing. It's a global impact on air travel and indeed on humanity. And of course, the immediate requirement is that we see borders open, we see quarantine restrictions lifted. Indeed, some countries such as the UK are just in the process of going into that type of restriction. Beyond that, we have the question of customer confidence, the big topic of social distancing, not simply on aircraft, but in terms of how it's going to affect our lives. And with a recession around the corner as well, then with people not having money in their pockets to fly, be that for leisure or business, I think the challenges are going to be running ahead for years rather than months, and are going to involve many things being put right or modified to what you could say would be a new normal to see any level of recovery for the industry.
The airlines are going to have to react pretty fast, as are the airports as well, in terms of social distancing. But will all the airlines have to reconfigure or redesign their planes?
It simply doesn't make sense to make actual changes to the configuration of aircraft in terms of the numbers of seats, or even to leave seats empty. We've heard a lot of talk about leaving the middle seat free, but that, number one, doesn't actually give you enough distance based on the 2 meters that is talked about with fellow passengers, neither by your side nor indeed if you think of passengers in front or behind. And in any case, it simply destroys the economics of airline operations. To actually achieve a real physical distance on a plane would actually mean airlines running little more than about 20 or 30% full. And of course, that again is not economically viable. So anything that is done about this issue has to be done on the ground. Yes, passengers can wear masks, and indeed most airlines are now asking passengers and their crew to wear masks on board. They're making changes to service routines in terms of meals or onboard purchases, which are certainly scaled down at the present time. But we need to look at processes at airports for testing people, or preferably even before people get to the airports, because anything in the airport itself reduces capacity. If we have to queue with more distance, given that airports are known for pressure points of queuing up, such as security search, such as baggage collection, of course, boarding at the gate, that simply means you lose capacity at airports. And many airports have talked about losing 20 to 40% of available capacity. Dublin Airport has been quoted as saying they would lose 70% of the capacity. Now, if that happens, of course, you don't have the ability to resource the normal passenger volumes or the number of flights we have had prior to this crisis.
Travelling by plane is not as wonderful as it used to be 20, 30 years ago, mainly because of security checks and other reasons, just the basic numbers travelling in the air. So how are you going to persuade passengers to get into planes again? Will it be low fares, or will the fares have to go up to pay for the hiatus?
Well, definitely in the short term, we're going to see prices go down. We've already heard leaders of low-cost airlines here in Europe, such as the chief executive of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, talking about the mother of all fare wars. Another large European low-cost airline, Wizz, has said they will offer exceptionally low fares because in the past it's been proven that offering low fares does kind of kickstart the market for people traveling again. But there's also the softer element of building people's confidence by ensuring people feel that they are in a safe environment, by encouraging customers to wear masks, by sanitization and cleansing measures for aircraft. But those themselves can bring extra complexity, and if we have to also use technology to try to overcome the pressure points of testing or whatever is required for this virus when people are traveling, over the medium term, we could actually see prices moving upward, because if airlines, for example, are not able to fly their planes as intensely because more time is needed between operating services to do cleaning and so on, or if they have to bring in technology for airlines or airports to smooth the process, all of that costs money, and of course airlines are going to fail in this process. So if there's less capacity in the future in certain markets, there could be a new normal in the pricing arena as well, with rather higher prices.
Are there opportunities here, John, for the airline industry, a chance to pause and perhaps rethink the whole business model?
I think actually there'll be no choice for airlines in rethinking the business model, because there's going to be so much change, whether it is a question of passenger confidence, the prices at which people are willing to travel, the impact of recession on demand, and particularly for those airlines who rely on strong business traffic, especially business customers traveling in more expensive business class seats. If they don't return, and there's certainly enormous doubt about how many will, because some companies, of course, are going to fail in many sectors of the economy. Others have already introduced travel bans or become used to using online conferencing. That will dent the revenues of a number of airlines, and the whole business process by which airlines operate will have to be changed, looking for example, more flexibility in ways of working, more nimbleness at adding and changing routes and capacity as we go forward, the emphasis on different kinds of aircraft. And I think we'll see also further consolidation in the industry, particularly in Europe, where airlines will disappear or maybe be bought up by other carriers. Low-cost carriers are certainly going to strengthen their position, but at the moment it's not clear what will happen with the rest of the industry.
Air transport consultant John Strickland, many thanks to you, John, for joining us here on The Agenda. It's been another tough week for the airline industry, and some are already asking, can we imagine a world without mass air travel? Well, at the moment you don't have to. Just look out the window or at one of those flight tracker websites. Even around cities like London, the skies are almost clear, the airports all but deserted. Airlines operating at a tiny fraction of their capacity. A new report from PricewaterhouseCoopers claims 60% of the world's airline fleets are still grounded, and that's almost 18,000 commercial airliners currently inactive, sitting on the tarmac or in hangars all over the world. Over the past half-century, the travel industry has grown faster than a beach bar tab on a sunny afternoon. In 1970, fewer than 200 million people went on holiday abroad. Last year, that figure was 1.5 billion. Soaring incomes in China explain part of the increase. It's also become cheaper to fly and easier to browse online for that perfect holiday. But this year might see global passenger numbers slump, and some airlines will almost certainly disappear altogether. But with the summer holiday season in the Northern Hemisphere still to come, there is just a glimmer of hope as airlines attempt to restart their businesses. Frank Sinatra's famous lyric says, "Fly me to the moon." But at the moment, he wouldn't have been cleared for takeoff. Coming up on a future agenda, the benefits of boredom, why some experts are expecting a creativity boost from life after lockdown. And don't forget, for more agenda content, you can visit our website and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.